She should not have been on the east tower at all. The servants' stairs ended 2 floors below, and the passage beyond them was not hers to walk. Not at 11:30 on a November night, when the house was sleeping and the wind off the moors had turned the leaded windows to something close to ice. Nora had gone up because she had seen the light from the courtyard. A single candle moving in the tower room window, where there should have been no candle, where the door had been locked since the young master's death, 3 months past. She told herself it was her duty, that something had been left burning, that a fire in the east tower would take the old wing before morning. She told herself that all the way up the stairs, her tallow candle guttering at each landing in the draught that moved through the old stone walls at night, like something restless. She found the door unlocked and the room empty, the candle guttered on the sill, wax pooled and already cooling. The tower's outer door was open to the parapet beyond it. The wind struck her like a fist the moment she crossed the threshold, the cold of it absolute, the kind of cold that came off the northern moors and had no mercy in it. She stepped through anyway, because the light had moved. She had seen it move, and the parapet was old stone, uneven underfoot, and the drop on the far side was 40 feet to the frozen kitchen garden below. The stones under her shoes were slick with frost. She went carefully. She went quickly. Edmund Carlyle, Viscount Ashmore, heir to the earldom of Whitvale, stood at the far end of the parapet with both hands braced on the crumbling outer wall and his head tipped back to the sky. He was not watching where his feet were. One boot heel was already at the edge. She crossed the distance in 4 strides and caught his arm. He startled, lurched, and the stone beneath his right foot crumbled at the corner and gave way. For one terrible second, the weight of him pulled against her grip, and she dug her heels into the parapet and held, her shoulders screaming, her breath gone entirely, the wind taking her cap and sending it spinning out into the dark. Then he found his footing on the solid stone, and his weight steadied, and they stood there together in the November gale, her hand locked around his forearm, his hand locked around her wrist, and 40 feet of cold air beneath the place where the stone had been. He looked down at her hand. Then he looked at her face. She did not let go. Nora Weston had come to Whitvale Park 4 years before her 23rd autumn, in the year the old countess had still been alive, to interview her. She had come from the village of Brentwick, 3 miles east, the eldest daughter of a schoolmaster who had left her 3 things when he died: a habit of reading, a facility with numbers, and a debt too large for any of the remaining Westons to service on their own. Her mother had died the winter before her father. Her younger sister Agnes was 12 and still in the schoolmaster's house, in the care of the new teacher who had not yet tired of charity. The debt was £240, held by a solicitor in Harrogate, and it renewed with interest each January. The position at Whitvale paid £11 a year. Nora had been good at it. She was not striking in the way that drew attention in a drawing room. She was slight, 5 feet 3 inches, with the kind of wiry strong arms that came from carrying coal scuttles and silver trays and baskets of wet laundry up steep servant stairs for 4 years. Her hair was dark auburn, pinned every morning into a tight updo beneath her cap, though one curl always escaped at the left temple, no matter what she did to it. She had wide-set hazel eyes, a firm, straight mouth, a small scar at the right brow where she had caught a doorframe at 10 years old, and the particular quality of expression of a person who has learned to make her face reveal nothing while her mind works steadily behind it. Her working dress was dark gray, neat and plain, her apron white and well-pressed because she had never seen the use of sloppiness, even in work no one remarked upon. Her shoes were worn at the heel. She had one good dress, brown wool with a white collar, which she wore on Sundays and holidays, and which she kept mended with stitches small enough that the repairs were nearly invisible if you did not look directly at them. She looked, in other words, exactly like what she was. The house had not decided she was invisible so much as it had never decided to look. The hierarchy of Whitvale was managed by Lady Harriet Carlisle, the late Earl's younger sister, who had come to stay 3 months past when the young Lord Tobias died, and the household fell to pieces with grief. Lady Harriet had the kind of authority that did not raise its voice, because it had never needed to. She moved through the house in dark silk, jet at her throat, silver hair pinned so severely it seemed to flatten the air around it, and she made decisions about rooms and menus and guests and servants with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had been organizing the lives of others since before any of them had been born. It was Lady Harriet who had arranged for Miss Vane to visit. Miss Vane was a neighbor's daughter, 24, fair-haired and polished, the kind of young woman who wore cream muslin without effort and occupied a chair as if she had been placed there by someone who understood composition. She had been coming to Whitvale since the autumn began, at first with her mother, then sometimes alone, escorted to the library or the morning room where, presumably, she and Edmund were meant to find each other agreeable. Whether he found her agreeable, Nora could not say. She had seen him in the same room as Miss Vane exactly 3 times. He had not once looked at her. He did not, Nora had noticed, look at much of anything anymore. Not since Tobias. She had heard the story from the upper housemaid, who had it from the footman, who had it from the groom who had been present. The young Lord Tobias Carlisle had died in October, thrown from a horse on the 2nd day of a hunt that Edmund himself had planned and organized, a hunt to celebrate Tobias's 25th year. The horse had shied at a ditch. The fall had been quick. Tobias had not suffered, the groom said, as if this were a mercy of some kind. Edmund had suffered enough for both of them ever since. She had first noticed it 6 weeks ago, the way he moved through the house as if he were not certain the floors would bear his weight. He ate sparingly and slept badly. She knew because she was the one who cleared his trays and made his bed, and the evidence of both was plain in what was left untouched and what was tangled into knots. He came to dinner when his aunt required it, and spoke the minimum number of words to make the occasion technically pass. He was not unkind to anyone. He was simply absent. A tall, lean figure in a navy-fitted tailcoat and loosened white cravat, dark brown hair grown slightly past its proper trim, with deep-set gray eyes that held shadows beneath them and a scar along the left cheekbone from a riding accident in youth. A man waiting for something to end that had not ended yet. She had not expected to find herself on a tower parapet with her hand around his forearm. She also had not expected him to speak first. "You are freezing," he said. His voice was level, quieter than the wind. "You are not much warmer," she said, which was not what a maid said to a viscount, but the wind had taken all the appropriate words with her cap. He looked down at her hand again. She released his arm, stepped back, and put both hands flat against her sides. She could feel the cold all the way through her gray working dress, through the thin layers beneath it, and her shoulders still ached where it had borne his weight. "I did not mean to," he began, and stopped. "I know," she said. She did not know. She knew only that the stone had crumbled and that she had held on. She knew that his face, in the thin moonlight, held not recklessness but grief so accumulated that the edges of things had stopped meaning anything in particular to him, and that he had come out here without thinking about the edge, and that the consequence of that inattention had been 40 feet of cold air and a parlor-maid's grip. She pulled her handkerchief from her apron pocket, plain cotton, her own, because she had noticed that his right hand was bleeding at the palm where the crumbling stone had cut it. "Give me your hand," she said. He did. She bound the cut quickly, in the cold, her fingers steady, because she would not let them be otherwise. When she finished, she looked up and found him watching her with an expression she could not name. Not gratitude, not embarrassment, but something older and more careful than either. The tower door should be locked, she said. From now? Yes, he said. She went back inside. She told no one. The handkerchief she left with him, simply let go of it when she went. And afterward, she did not think it was the right thing to ask for back. Downstairs, life proceeded as it always did. Lady Harriet's arrangements progressed through November with the efficiency of a military campaign. Miss Vane came twice more that fortnight, once for a dinner at which she and Edmund sat 4 chairs apart and conversed in the way acquaintances conversed when they had been told to find each other agreeable. Lady Harriet watched the dinner from her end of the table with the satisfaction of a woman whose arrangements were settling, and Nora served from the left side and removed plates and refilled glasses and made herself as absent as the walls. She was, she understood, not part of any calculation that mattered in this house. She had understood that for 4 years. It was the morning after the second dinner, in the passage outside Lady Harriet's sitting room, that she first heard herself named. She was rerouting around a mop and bucket left in the main corridor, and Lady Harriet's door was not fully closed. "The little maid," Lady Harriet said, to someone who answered too quietly for Nora to hear. "The one with the auburn hair. I have seen Ashmore's eyes follow her twice when he thought no one was looking. It wants managing. His attention must be redirected, and I will not have anything complicate the business with Miss Vane." Nora stood very still in the passage. Then she moved on, said nothing to anyone, and went about the rest of her day. She tried not to examine what she had felt in the moment before she moved on. The examination produced nothing useful. The thing was, his eyes had followed her. She had noticed it before Lady Harriet said so, because noticing was what Nora did, and because the noticing had made something warm and unwelcome settle in her chest each time she recognized it. He did not speak to her again after the tower. Not directly. Not in any exchange that would have counted as conversation under the house's rules. Sometimes when she was clearing a room he was in, she would look up and find him watching, and he would not look away. He held the gaze for a moment, steady and direct, the way a person looked at something they were trying to understand, and then he would turn back to his book or his papers, and she would finish her work and leave and count herself a fool on the stairs. He was grieving. He was the heir to an earldom. She was a maid with a debt, and a little sister in Brentwick. She was very clear with herself about these facts. In December he spoke to her in the library. She was dusting the high shelves, moving each volume and returning it to its exact position. And she had not noticed him come in, because she was on the ladder, and the fire had been making noise. She came down with an armful of volumes, and found him standing 4 feet away, watching her. She did not drop the books. "Miss Weston," he said. It was the first time he had used her name. She had not known he knew it. "My lord," she said. He was silent for a moment, which she had come to understand was his habit. He did not fill space with words. "Is the cold better in here?" he said. It was not quite a question. "The library keeps the warmth well," she said. "The East Tower does not." She had not meant to say that. The words came out level, as if she had planned them. He held it still. Then something in his face shifted, not a smile, but the smallest relaxation of the muscles around his eyes, so subtle it would have meant nothing if you had not been watching very carefully. "No," he said. "It does not." He looked at the books in her arms. "The Hakluyt's Voyages is shelved incorrectly. It belongs 3 volumes left of where you have placed it." "I have been placing it there for 4 years," she said, "on the assumption that if you wanted it differently, you would have said." "I have only now said," he said. She replaced the Hakluyt's Voyages 3 volumes to the left. She could feel him watching, Her hands were perfectly steady. He sat down in the chair by the fire and opened his own book, and she finished the high shelves and came down and left the library, and the warmth she had felt in her chest on the stairs was considerably worse than it had been before. She was very clear with herself. It made no difference. She was not clear enough to prevent what happened 3 days later. She was carrying fresh candles to the back sitting room when she heard a sound from the small garden below the east corridor window. A quiet sound, a repeated motion, something rhythmic and deliberate. She looked down from the leaded glass and saw Edmund in the December garden, his coat on despite the cold, raking leaves from around a stone bench with a focused, unhurried motion that had nothing of a lord about it and everything of a man who needed to do something with his hands. The bench was in the far corner, against the garden wall, and there was a small planted plot beside it that had gone ragged in the autumn. He was tending it. She watched him for a moment she could not account for. Then she understood. The planted plot beside the bench had once been a herb garden. She knew because she had helped carry soil for it 2 seasons past. It had been planted by Lord Tobias, who had taken an interest in gardening the way young men sometimes did, briefly and ardently. It had been left untended since October. Edmund raked leaves from around it with the careful motion of a man handling something he was afraid to break. She stood at the window until the cold of the glass against her hands reminded her to move. And then she moved. And she did not say to herself that she understood now why he had gone up to the tower that November night, because she had not permitted herself to say it before, and would not say it now. She lit the candles in the back sitting room and went back to work. It was 2 days before Christmas that Lady Harriet moved in earnest. There had been a larger dinner. The house opened to 12 guests for the season, all the correct families within 12 miles of Whitvale. Miss Vane had come with her mother and had been placed at Edmund's right hand. Edmund had spoken to her in the civil, obligatory way he spoke to everyone these days. Miss Vane had responded prettily. The guests had remarked to one another that the young Viscount seemed more present than he had been in October, which was to say he had looked up from his plate twice and formed complete sentences. Nora had served the first course, as she always did, and was on her way back to the kitchen when she heard Lady Harriet's voice in the passage beside the dining room, lowered to the register of a woman who wished to be confidential without being private. "The little maid," Lady Harriet said. "The one I mentioned to you. She has been allowed a great deal of latitude, and I believe it has produced a certain familiarity that wants correcting. I shall address it with Mrs. Dawes after the new year. It is not her fault, of course. One cannot blame the girl. He is not himself, and she has been convenient to notice. I mean to have matters settled by spring." A second voice said something soft and sympathetic. Nora carried her tray to the kitchen and set it down and went about the rest of the evening, and if Mrs. Dawes noticed that she was quieter than usual, she did not ask. The winter drew in. In January, Edmund found her in the library again. He was there when she arrived, which was not the same as being present when she happened to appear, and she registered the difference and did not remark on it. He gave her a book. "This belonged to my brother," he said, and his voice was careful in the way voices were careful around things that might break. He had marked a passage. "I thought it might be of interest to you." She took the book. It was a volume of travels, a man's account of his journey through the Italian provinces, and the marked passage described a woman the traveler had seen at a farmhouse near Florence, who had kept her farm going alone for 3 years after her husband's death, who had known more about the land than anyone had thought to ask her, and who had not looked up from her work when the traveler arrived, because there was still work to do. She read it standing at the library table while Edmund waited. "He would have liked you," he said. It was not something a viscount said to his parlor maid. He seemed to know it. He did not take it back. "I did not know him," she said. "No," he said. "He knew you, in the way one knows the people who move through the rooms of a house one loves. He spoke well of the girl who put the fire out one December when I was in London, and he was here alone." A pause. "The chimney fire in the back bedroom. Were you aware the story had reached me?" "I had not lit the chimney since," she said. Something that was not quite a smile crossed his face and was gone before it arrived. She handed the book back. He shook his head. She kept it. She put it under her pillow that night and lay with her hand on its cover and thought about Tobias Carlyle, whom she had known as a cheerful young man who tipped the household at Christmas and asked the kitchen for biscuits at odd hours, and she thought about what it cost to plant a garden and then lose the person for whom you had planted it, and she thought about the tower and pressed the thought down and did not think about it again. Then he told her about Tobias directly. It was January still, a pale Thursday afternoon with the moors invisible behind gray cloud, and she had been returning books to the upper shelves when he said, without preamble, "He did not feel pain. The groom told me. I've been deciding whether to believe it." She came down from the ladder. "I think," she said carefully, "that the groom told you because he understood that you needed to hear it, and that the truth of it is less important than the fact that it was said by a man who was there and has no reason to lie to you." He looked at her for a long moment. His face was the face of a man who had been carrying something very heavy in a very small room and had just been handed the first key he had been offered. "I arranged the hunt," he said. "You arranged a pleasure for your brother on the occasion of his birthday," she said. "That is what you did. The horse shied at a ditch. Those are two separate things." He said nothing. He stood at the library table with his hand flat on its surface and looked at the grain of the wood, and she watched him breathe 3 slow, deliberate breaths, and she thought about what it meant to carry guilt for something you could not have known to prevent, and she thought about the edge of the parapet and what he had been doing there, and she said none of it because he did not need her to say it. What he had needed, she thought, was someone who would stand steady while he said the thing he had not said aloud. She had simply been there. He was 25, Edmund said. "Yes," she said. "He had planted a herb garden," he said. "He had plans for the south field." "I know," she said. "I helped carry the soil for the garden." He looked up. It was the first time in that conversation that he looked directly at her, and she saw in his face what she had not seen before. Not the composed grief of a man who had made himself accept what had happened, but the specific grief of a man who had not, who was still standing at the edge of it, and who had been standing there alone for 3 months. He was 31 years old, and he had been carrying this in the dark. He did not collapse. He simply stood in the library in the January light and breathed, and she stayed where she was until he was ready to stop. "Thank you, Miss Weston," he said at last. "You are welcome, my lord," she said. She left the library and went down the stairs and stood in the passage for a moment with her hand on the cold plaster of the wall. The warmth that had been settling in her chest for months was no longer inconvenient and warm. It had been that for a while, merely inconvenient. Something she pressed down on the stairs each morning and smoothed out like a wrinkle in linen. Something she told herself was the natural sympathy one felt for a man in grief and nothing more. She had told herself that in November and in December and into January. She had been fairly convincing. She was not convincing now. The warmth was something else now, something that had roots, and she could not pull it out without damage, and she knew it. and knowing it was its own particular difficulty, because she was a maid with a debt, and he was the heir to an earldom, and none of the plain arithmetic of her life had changed. In February, a guest named Mr. Brentfield came to stay for a fortnight. He was a friend of Lady Harriet's son, a polished man of 38, with the easy confidence of inherited income, and he had been in the house 3 days when he said the thing he said in the front corridor, within full earshot of Edmund, who was crossing from the study to the morning room. "The little maid," Brentfield said to someone just inside the corridor door, his voice carrying the slippery quality of a man amusing himself. "With the hazel eyes. Has she been here long? She has a directness about her that one does not expect from the lower staff." Nora heard it from the kitchen passage, where she stood with a tray of folded table linen. She heard Edmund stop walking. She did not look up. What happened next she learned from the footman who had been in the doorway. Edmund had not spoken, had not needed to. He had looked at Brentfield for a long, steady moment with those gray eyes, and then continued on his way, and Brentfield had become unexpectedly interested in the pattern on the hallway wallpaper, and had not spoken again on the subject. That evening, Lady Harriet told Mrs. Dawes to inform Nora that she would be reassigned to the scullery for the duration of the spring. Mrs. Dawes delivered the news in the quiet, apologetic way she delivered all difficult news, seated at the table in her sitting room, hands folded, voice even. "Her ladyship feels that a change of duties would suit you better. As of Monday." The scullery meant no more library, no more dining room, no more rooms where Edmund was present in any ordinary course. It meant she had been removed. "Yes, Mrs. Dawes," Nora said. She went back to her room and sat on the edge of her bed, and did not permit herself to do anything that would require explaining. The room was small and cold. The window faced north, and never got the light. She had hung a piece of green ribbon from the curtain rod because Agnes had sent it at Christmas, and she could not think what else to do with it. And it was the only spot of color in the room that was not gray or brown or the dull yellow of the tallow candle. She looked at the ribbon for a long time. She took the volume of travels from beneath her pillow and sat with it in her lap, her thumb running along the spine, and she thought about the farm woman near Florence who had kept working because there was still work to do, and she thought about her sister in Brentwick, and the debt, and the plain arithmetic of her life. She put the book away and went to sleep. She would go to the scullery on Monday. Lord Ashmore would marry Miss Vane in the spring and go on being the heir and then the earl, and eventually she would not remember what the library had smelled like on Wednesday mornings, the particular combination of coal smoke and old leather, and the cold air that came under the east window in winter. She spent Sunday tending to a small pot of herbs she had grown on her window ledge, rosemary and a little thyme, because the cold had thinned them, and they needed attention. On Sunday afternoon, Lady Harriet held a gathering in the drawing room. It was not a formal occasion, merely a dozen neighbors, tea, the kind of sustained genteel conversation that Lady Harriet organized with mechanical precision. Edmund was present because he was always required to be present. Miss Vane was there with her mother, seated near the fire, saying the correct things at the correct moments. The room was full of the particular light that a February afternoon produced through tall, south-facing windows, pale and clear and cold. Nora was serving tea. She moved around the room with the precision of 4 years' practice, and she did not look at Edmund, who was standing near the windows, and she did not look at Miss Vane, who was looking at Edmund with the measured attention of a young woman who had been told something was nearly settled. She set down cups and lifted them, and made herself as absent as she had always known how to make herself. Lady Harriet called for the second pot. Nora turned for the door. "I believe," Lady Harriet said, loud enough for the room, that we might expect a pleasant announcement before the season is fully begun. I do not speak prematurely. I speak with the particular confidence of someone who has managed these matters before. The room made the sounds of pleasure and interest that rooms made at such statements. Lord Ashmore has shown himself to be a man of excellent judgment. What this household requires now is the right sort of steadiness, the kind that comes from a well-considered match. Nora was at the door. She heard Miss Vane say something gracious. She heard Edmund say nothing. She heard Edmund's footsteps, which she recognized because she had been hearing them cross floors for 4 months, cross the room. She stopped at the door. She did not know why she stopped. "Miss Weston," he said. And the room went quiet in the particular way rooms went quiet when something happened that had not been in any arrangement. She turned. He had crossed from the window. He stood in the center of the room, and he was not looking at his aunt or at Miss Vane or at any of the assembled faces turned toward him with expressions of confusion carefully maintained as interest. He was looking at Nora. He was holding the handkerchief. He had kept it all this time, through November and December and January and the whole long cold February. It was not new cotton anymore. It was worn at the fold, the way a thing was worn when it had been taken out and put away many times over. He held it in his right hand, the hand she had bound on the parapet, and his face in the pale afternoon light was not composed. It was open. It was a face that had let something show, deliberately, in front of a room full of witnesses, and there was no taking it back. "Miss Weston is to be my wife," he said. "That is settled." The room did not breathe. Lady Harriet's fan stopped moving. Miss Vane looked at the handkerchief. Her expression was not wounded so much as abruptly recalibrated, a young woman recognizing that the room had shifted around her and that the graceful thing was to let it shift. "Ashmore," Lady Harriet said. Her voice was level. It cost her something to keep it so. "I have spoken to the solicitor," Edmund said to the room, still looking at Nora. "I have spoken to my father's man of business. The letter is written. I mention it now because I will not have it managed by anyone else, and because I will not have Miss Weston reassigned to the scullery without cause." Lady Harriet closed her fan with a small, precise motion. She was not a woman who was easily undone. She looked at Nora for a long moment with the expression of a woman who had misread a room thoroughly for months and was already reorganizing her understanding of it. Whatever she found in Nora's face, she held it still, and then she turned back to her guests, with the practiced equanimity of someone who had been managing difficult moments in drawing rooms for 30 years. "I see," Lady Harriet said. "Well." Around them, the room was very quiet. 12 neighbors sat in their chairs and found things to look at on the floor or in their teacups, as English people did when something of consequence had occurred and they were unsure of their footing. Miss Vane's mother reached out and patted her daughter's hand once, briefly, and Miss Vane permitted it without looking up. In the grate, the fire crackled and settled. The afternoon light came in through the tall south windows and lay across the room in long, pale bars, unchanged by any of it. It was, Nora thought, as close to capitulation as she was likely to get. It was enough. Edmund crossed to her. He held out the handkerchief. "I believe this belongs to you," he said, quietly, for her alone. "I should have said so sooner. You might have found a less public moment," she said. "I have not been good at quiet moments lately," he said. "I am told that may improve." She looked at his face. This man she had found on a tower's edge and held on to without calculation or permission, or anything except the immediate and uncomplicated refusal to let him fall. His gray eyes were serious and present in the way they had not been present for months. The shadows beneath them lighter now. Something in his posture that had begun, slowly, to belong to a man who had put down what he had been carrying and was learning what it felt like to stand without it. She thought about the Hakluyt's Voyages 3 volumes to the left, and the travel volume under her pillow, and the way he had stood in the December garden tending what Tobias had planted. She took the handkerchief. His fingers closed briefly around hers before they let go. "Miss Weston," he said. Then lower, in a register that the room could not quite hear. "Nora." It was the first time. The room was behind them, rearranging itself into the new geography, and she did not look at any of it. She looked at him. "Edmund," she said. Outside, February was still February. The moors were cold, and the light was the pale, clear kind that offered warmth without providing it. The solicitor's letter was written, and the matter would be what it was, and Lady Harriet would arrange herself around it, because Lady Harriet arranged herself around everything. And the debt in Harrogate would be paid by spring. They were married in April, quietly, at the estate church, with Mrs. Dawes in the front pew and Agnes Weston beside her, 12 years old and trying not to cry with an energy that made the whole effort obvious. Lady Harriet was present because she was always present, and she sat with her hands folded and her face arranged in the expression of a woman who had decided to be gracious about a thing she could not alter, which was close enough to approval for practical purposes. Edmund had given Nora a ring that had been his mother's, not his grandmother's, which was a distinction the guests understood even if they did not remark on it. The ceremony was brief. The weather held. Agnes wept anyway, discreetly, into a borrowed handkerchief. That evening, after the small dinner that followed, Nora found Edmund in the library. He was standing at the high shelves where she had been when he had first called her by name, and he had a volume in his hand. "You have moved it," she said. "3 volumes to the right," he said, without looking around. "That is where it was before you told me it was wrong." "I told you where I wanted it," he said. "You told me you had been placing it correctly for 4 years. I have considered the matter, and you were right." She stood in the doorway and looked at him, this tall and grave man in his navy coat, with his dark hair not quite tamed and his gray eyes steady in the firelight. And she thought about November, and the cold stone and the 40 feet of dark air, and what would have become of this particular library, this particular evening, if she had not gone up the tower stairs. She went to the east wing window. Outside, the April evening was soft, the moors gone pale green at last, and below in the garden she could see the small planted plot beside the stone bench, which had been tended through the winter and now showed the first low growth of the new season. She had helped carry soil for it once. She had grown rosemary on her window ledge, and the rosemary had been moved to a south-facing shelf in the kitchen garden because there was more sun there and room to grow. Small things. They accumulated. Edmund had come to stand a few feet behind her. He held her handkerchief in his right hand. He had been carrying it still, she saw, through the ceremony and the dinner. And now at the end of the evening, he held it out, and she took it. And his fingers closed around hers before they let go, the warmth of them against her cold from the window glass, a specific and small event that she would remember longer than she remembered most things. "I kept it a long time," he said. "I know," she said. "I did not know how to explain why," he said. "You explained it well enough," she said. In the end. He said nothing for a moment. The fire settled behind them. She could feel the warmth of him, the steadiness of him standing close. And she thought about the parapet and the grip and the terrible second of cold air beneath them. And she thought that this was what it meant to hold on. That it was not the single desperate moment alone, but everything that came after. The accumulation of ordinary mornings, the Hakluyt's voyages correctly shelved, the herb garden tended, the name spoken quietly in a room full of people who had decided not to look. She turned from the window. He was looking at her with his gray eyes direct and open and present, and the scar along his left cheekbone caught the firelight, and his right hand was still warm from where it had held hers. Outside, the new green grew in the garden where Tobias had planted it, patient and small in the April evening, and in the library the books stood in their right places, and the handkerchief was warm in Nora's hand, and the candle on the sill burned steadily. It would burn for a long time yet. If you found yourself holding your breath at that tower's edge alongside Nora, leave a word in the comments. It means more than you know.